In this video, we're going to go over equations of hyperbolas that are centered at the origin and that have a transverse axis along the x-axis. And so here is my equation. We have x squared over a squared. Remember from that definition, it's the difference, right? So now it is minus y squared over b squared equals 1. So I know this is centered at 0, 0, because when it gets shifted, you will have a minus h and a minus k in that equation. So if this is just x squared, that means your h is 0. And if you just have y squared, that means your k is 0. So because we don't have x plus or minus anything or y plus or minus anything, because it's just x squared, y squared, we know it's centered at the origin. I know that my transverse axis is the x-axis because my x is first. When we go to the transverse axis being along the y-axis, then my y term will be first. So we still label my two foci as C, and that's what we did with ellipses. And then my vertices are A. So when I come over here to my diagram, you can see your vertices right here, A0 and negative A0, and then your foci are right here. So your transverse axis contains all of your points, the center, your two vertices, and your two foci. And remember from last video, I said that usually with the ellipse, not usually, with the ellipse, your focus or your foci are in between your two vertices. This time my vertices are inside and my foci are outside. So pay attention to that. Then we have a formula again. To find either my B or my C, we'll always have A. But to find my B or my C, and this is different than my formula with ellipse. My formula with ellipse is B squared equals A squared minus C squared. And here we're doing C squared minus A squared. Now you don't have to memorize these, right? On your formula sheet, you have ellipse. You have this formula down here, and same thing on the back. You have hyperbola, and you have that right there. Okay, but I do want to make a note that those are slightly different. And then lastly, you might need to pause this video and write this in. As I explained up here, you're going to have two asymptotes, and that's how we know the shape of these hyperbolas. So you're going to have two asymptotes going through here. That's going to go through the center, okay, in this case, the origin. And you can find your equations for your asymptote by using this right here, y equals plus or minus b over ax. You've got one, here's your negative slope. Here's your positive slope. That's why it's plus or minus for those two lines. And that a and b come from your a squared and your b squared down here in your formula. And then just like with your ellipse, this equation here will always equal, or should always equal 1. Okay, so that's again a lot of information. Hopefully it makes a little bit more sense since we've already gone over ellipses. I'm sure it doesn't make a lot of sense. So hopefully when we jump into this first formula, that it's going to help. So example 1, find an equation of the hyperbola with the center at the origin, one focus at 4, 0, and one vertex at -3, 0. graph the equation. Okay. So I am going to go ahead and start graphing these. We have the center at the origin. So I can put that point in there. We have a focus at 4, 0. And so my foci are going to be equal distance from this center. So that means my other focus is 1, 2, 3, 4 in the other direction. I have a vertex at -3, 0. And again, that vertex is also equal distance from the center. So I'm going to go 3 the other way. Okay, we don't know any different yet, but I can see that my transverse axis is along the x-axis because that's what contains those points there. The transverse axis goes through these 5 points, the 2 foci, the 2 vertices, and the center. So that tells me I'm using this equation here. Okay. I know that my center is at 0, 0, so that x squared, y squared is perfect. So now I just need my A and my B. Well, I have at least one of those. My A refers to my vertices. Well, my vertices at -3 and 3. So that means that A equals 3. Then my focus is at 4, 0. My foci we label with the variable C. So we have C equals 4. So I will use this formula to find my B, and then I will have both. I already have A, but now I need B. So B squared equals C squared minus A squared. B squared equals my C squared is 16 minus my A squared is 9. And my B squared is 7. Now I have enough to write the equation, which is the first thing I need to do is write the equation. So this is x squared over my A squared is 9 minus y squared over B squared, which is 7. And that equals 1. So that's my equation. Now to finish this graph, I need to plot this point. So if B squared equals 7, then B is going to equal plus or minus the square root of 7, which is about plus or minus 2.6. So I'm going to plot that point. About 2.5 and about 2.5. So I use these points here. And I am actually going to put these points in a different color because this is not technically part of my graph. This is just helping me graph the shape of the hyperbola. So I'm going to make a box containing my vertices and these 2 points for B. So, and I'm putting these in some dashed lines because this, again, is not technically part of my parabola shape. Okay, and then once we make that box, I'm going to go ahead and use a ruler. I'm going to go from corner to corner of my box going through the center. And go on the other direction, corner to corner through the center. Okay, once I have all of that busyness, now I can make the shape of my parabola. I keep saying parabola, and I'm so sorry, guys. I can make the shape of my hyperbola. My hyperbola will start at the vertex, right? It starts at the vertex. That focus is in the middle. I'm going to start at my vertex. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this U shape where it starts hugging this line. Something like that. Same thing over here. Go from vertex, and you're going to make that U shape where it starts hugging that, that asymptote. And so the blue right here is my hyperbola, where that U shape has that V, that vertex in it, and the foci are on the outside or in the middle of both of my hyperbola shapes. Now, it does not ask for this, but let's just get in the habit of it. Let's just get some practice. It's also going to ask you at times to find the asymptote or the asymptotes. Okay, and this one doesn't, but again, practice. When you have the transverse axis going through the x-axis, here are your formulas for your asymptote. So we've got y equals plus or minus b over ax. So my b, I'm going to use this right here as the square root of 7 over my a, which is 3. So the equations for both of these two asymptotes are plus or minus square root 7 over 3, which should kind of make sense. If I start here in the origin, I'm going up square root 7, which is about 2.6, and then I am running 1, 2, 3 units. Or I'm going up square root 7, and I'm going negative 3 units. So that's just the slope of my line. Okay, let's try another example with the center at 0, 0 and the transverse axis along the x-axis. This one tells me to analyze the equation. That is, find the center, the transverse axis, the vertices, foci, and asymptotes. This one actually asks for it, and then we'll graph. Okay, so I know this is centered at 0, 0 because it's x squared, y squared. And I'm going to put that right up here. Okay. The center is 0, 0. Because my x is first, that makes my transverse axis my x-axis. Okay, so vertices, foci, and asymptotes. This is my a squared, and right, because this is x squared over a squared minus y squared over b squared equals 1. So a squared equals 25, which means a is plus or minus 5. That's my vertices. So that means my vertice is 5, 0, and negative 5, 0. And then this is my b squared. And that means b equals plus or minus 3. Okay, that does not give me my foci because my foci is represented by C. So to get my foci, we will use the formula b squared equals c squared minus a squared. So my b squared's 9. Don't know c squared, minus my a squared is 25. So let's add 25 over. And we get 34. So then C equals plus or minus the square root of 34. And that's 2 times 17. So that doesn't get broke down. But that means that C is about 5.8. So for my foci, that means that this is square root 34, 0, and negative square root 34, 0. Okay, and then lastly, my asymptotes. My formula is y equals plus or minus b over ax. So we will have plus or minus, my b is 3 over a, which is 5, x. So those are my two asymptotes. All right, so we now have all of our information. So now let's graph. So let's start with the center at 0, 0. We know the x-axis is my transverse, so it needs to go along here, which those points do. So we've got 5, 0 for my vertice and negative 5, 0 for my vertice. My foci is square root 34, 0 and negative 34, square root 34, 0, which is about plus or minus 5.8. So just a little bit beyond and a little bit beyond. Okay, so these are all the points for my graph. The other stuff we need to be able to actually make the shape of this. So I'm going to plot my B, which is up 3 and down 3, and then I'm going to make a box. I'm going to make a box containing these 2 points and my vertices. Right, and those are dashed lines because they're not really part of this. So I make that box to help me make my asymptotes. So we go from corner to corner through the center. And we'll do it the other way as well. Corner to corner through the center. So that's going to help me make the shape of this. We're going to go from vertice and then start hugging those asymptotes. It's going to be kind of hard to do here because we don't really have a lot of room. Okay, but over here, we can do a little bit better of a job. Vertice, hug that asymptote. Vertice, hug that asymptote.